Let me first thank all the speakers for participating in this session. I think everyone should appreciate the diversity of these important topics and how they come together to create a landscape for pediatric drug development in general, and then the added difficulties of doing work in pediatric rare diseases. I think there's some common themes here. And also I'd like to invite or welcome the additional panelists to this session as well. Again, I think it was just a fantastic way to kick things off, but and I encourage the participants listening in to add to the Q&A and participate in this dialogue. I'll fill out a few just basic questions based on listening just to get things started. I think I was really impressed with Art's kind of call to arms around the data sharing topic. One of the things that I think was pretty evident is I'm not sure we have really a culture of sharing. This is really not a technology issue in terms of being able to share. So I wonder if the panelists felt comfortable in kind of weighing in. Do you feel that we have a culture of sharing? And if not, why not? And how do we get there? How do we move the needle in terms of really investing this community to come together and share in a more meaningful way? In the wake of the pandemic, it was really impressive to see the community come together to develop each other's vaccines, to really share data in a more collaborative and meaningful way. But why is that not in place here for pediatrics, and especially for pediatric rare disease? Anyone on the panel like to chime in?
I'd be happy to take a first
Please.
stab at that. Hi, everyone. I'm Erwin Berthier. I'm a co-founder of Tasso. We've been working on patient-centric ways to collect clinical data from blood in a decentralized way for a while. And we've been working both with pharma companies and with patient advocacy groups in disease like Duchenne muscular dystrophy, for example. And one of the things I find interesting is I find there's a little bit of a disconnect between the perception of what is available, what is allowed for data sharing. And when you talk to some parents or patient advocacy groups, there's actually a desire to create better drugs and to hope that the data from their children might help develop better drugs. And so I do think that there's an opportunity to also engage potentially more with or have the regulators engage more with the patient advocacy groups, because there's an understanding that data sharing, from everything that I've seen, can lead to better drugs. So I think that's one avenue to move the discussion forward.
Let me add to it, Jeff and Erwin. You are referring to the cultural component on data sharing and the mindset of data sharing. And that is one of the multiple elements that we need to consider here. In the first place, the environment in which we are operating has changed. And there has been influencing factors for this environment to have changed. One of them is evidently COVID-19 and the implementation of rescue efforts of traditional clinical investigations by implementing decentralized clinical trials. So in the past, the mindset was more of being self-sufficient and doing everything by ourselves. That created a series of silos in many senses. Nowadays, we realize that if we work together, we can accomplish a lot more than what we could if we operate individually. And the necessity really is a major driver here. And so the necessity exists and the reality exists that we now have different ways of doing clinical investigations that are having a value proposition that is significantly important to streamline processes and procedures and deliver the medications for the pediatric rare disease. And so DCTs offer that kind of opportunity, and that requires community integration and participation of multiple stakeholders to make it happen.
Anyone else before we move on?
Yeah, so it's Glenn Clack here from the University of Sheffield. I mean, I'm having listened to the talk here, and although I do deal with pediatric drug development, most of my time spent in adult, a lot of these issues are common to adult diseases as well. We are particularly bad at talking to each other. The regulators and industry have grown up together over the last 100 years or so and do talk to each other, but probably not as well as they should do. Particularly larger companies seem to be very concerned about going to talk to the regulatory authorities. Some of the smaller companies I work with are more comfortable in doing that. And, you know, they are more approachable than they were 20 years ago. The MHRA are particularly approachable. Regulatory authorities, the FDA, are much better than they used to be. But there are other key individuals. We have merely paid patients lip service in the past with regards to their experience. We don't truly understand the patient journey through treatment at all. We collect quality of life data, and unless you have large amounts of it in later drug development, it isn't particularly useful. There are tools like the PROACT tool that uses apps that the CIUK are utilising at the moment. And although the data is qualitative, it's very useful in early drug development. There are charities, but we don't tend to, from an industry and an academic point of view, we don't interact with them as much as we should do. And the bit that concerns me is ethics committees. They are left out on a limb. We don't talk to them in academia for whatever reason. I don't know what it is. An industry feel that they can't talk to them because they're the perceived bad guys. So there are a lot of misperceptions that ethics committees have about doing things differently, about collecting data, particularly with regards to diversity and understanding the genotype of the individual. You know, are we stealing their genetic data? No, we're not. We're just trying to understand why they're different from other individuals. So you know, is it better than it was 20 to 30 years ago? It is, but there's still a long way that we can go getting all of the key individuals to talk to each other. And as somebody, or numerous people have said, the patient is a key part of that. Understanding that patient's journey. Constant grade 1 nausea is not a dose-limiting toxicity, but it probably will limit the dosing of that drug in the long term. And you're not going to understand that nausea qualitatively unless you speak to the patient.
Glenn and Jeff, quickly, let me just say this very quickly. The patient journey is critical and is essential in the modern clinical trial designs. Prior to that is mapping out the life cycle of the data. And another reality that we have here, along with the patient journey, and in parallel with that, is mapping out the digital data, the life cycle of the digital data. There is no way that one individual can do it all in terms of the participant journey and in terms of collecting data that is digital from multiple sources from end to end. That is a reality that we are facing. And the truth is that digitization of clinical investigations is a reality, is here to stay, and is happening not only in DCTs, but in all clinical investigations, even traditional clinical investigations. That requires a team.
Great point.
No, absolutely. Oh,
sorry. Well, Glenn mentioned bioethicists as bad guys here, so maybe we'll hear from our own bad guy, Skip Nelson.
I didn't suggest they were bad guys.
No, I know, Glenn. Skip, did you want to talk about people not talking to you as bioethicists?
Well, it is true that there are challenges to that conversation. And I think but there are opportunities for such conversation. You know, there's organizations, I think, of research ethics individuals within the United States and Europe that do have conversations. There's the European Forum for Good Clinical Practice, for example, in Europe. There's the PRIMER, the Professional Responsibility in Medicine and Research in the US. So I think there are opportunities. I think part of the challenge with data is there are so many actors in that field at this point that sorting out concerns on the use of data that may be driven by different commercial uses, separate from research, from the research use of data, that often I think there's a sort of one size fits all or a one set of concerns fits all approach that actually may impede data sharing, at least from an ethical perspective. In listening to Art's talk, I do agree with a lot of the cultural impediments, let's say, for data sharing. And hopefully we could get to the point where that's less of a concern over time. I think, one way of communicating with research ethics committees in their review of these is to make sure you have a very good section discussing the ethical issues around your use of data, so that they're not just making it up on their own. But it is a challenge. I see Mark's got his hand up and he just turned on his video. So
yeah, Mark is ready to go. Mark, let's.
Hi, my name is Mark Turner. I'm Mark Turner, neonatal paediatrician from Liverpool, UK. Just coming at this from a European perspective, if I may. A lot of what Marina described is happening in Europe on steroids through the European Joint Programme for Rare Diseases, €100 million public funded organization that's covering most of those bases, including data, working with 24 European reference networks and a whole range of other data providers, for example, to develop a virtual platform for all sorts of data, preclinical, molecular, genetic, as well as patient focused. So the tools are evolving. Of course, we have a very complex data governance system across in Europe, but there are ways to overcome that, and that culture is evolving. The Voice of Children has many outlets in Europe through Eurodis, the patient umbrella group for rare diseases, through the European Young People Advisory Group network, both of which can contribute to life cycle and patient preference studies. And we have our own Connect for Children pediatric trials network that can help with most of these areas. So it's good that this culture is moving on, and certainly in Europe, there are several initiatives that are contributing to that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. Elly, I think, has got another follow-up to this.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elly Barrett. I'm a pediatric oncologist, and I'm the head of clinical development at Day One Biopharmaceuticals. I just wanted to chime in and just really celebrate the Dr. Kalachniva's presentation on the Five Voices Consortium and really this, just initiatives taking place across the pediatric spectrum with respect to multi-stakeholder collaboration. And just to mention that for pediatric oncology, the Accelerate Multi-Stakeholder Forum is a group that has been around for almost 10 years, started out primarily focused in Europe, but now is international, and similarly brings together academia, regulatory voices, patient advocates, and industry to identify problems and work together in a multi-stakeholder fashion to find solutions. And for a number of years now has been in the context of working groups, working on specific solutions such as adolescent participation in adult trials, coming together to form a platform for collection of long-term follow-up data in cancer trials, international collaborations, and so forth, and has published a number of white papers. And I think there's an opportunity maybe for collaboration across these platforms and synergy, so we can all learn from each other.
Well, Marina, I think I see you smiling there. So you want to chime in here and tell us why we're not doing all that we could?
Well, we are doing good, right? So like we are doing what we can do. And thank you so much for kind words. I'm always open for collaboration and integration, right? As I mentioned, historically, it has been very limited, right? So far, we have seeds of insights from regulators, from payers, from investors moving through our development until we actually submit our regulatory dossier and value dossier. Then we can have like more full insights. And for the companies, and especially for small and medium biotechs who are like 80–70% of basically business community in rare and orphan space, who are lacking interactions with the agencies, is very challenging. It's very stressful. And I just wanted to highlight here my experience in 18 years. I'm attending multiple conferences, and at every conference there will be and there was a case where someone has a question and they have this urgent problem and they're asking how to solve this question, and there is someone in the someone there in the auditory sitting and saying, we had this question and this is how we solved it. So historically, rare and orphan space is very siloed space, unfortunately, and there is no framework where you can join and ask questions. There are some frameworks dedicated for pharmaceutical companies. There are some like European Reference Network, ideal and amazing initiatives supporting patients actually in the best interest of the patient for diagnosis, for access to treatment and care, right? So how, until we will put it all together, that would be challenging, because unfortunately I've learned it at university when I studied rare and orphan, that every stakeholder in the space has its own agenda, and it's true, it's still this way, right? So like if you will just take the priorities, and I showed in my presentation, if you will just take our current framework, who are making decisions versus who are benefiting from the decision, the patient was never at the center, and the patient cannot be at the center with current framework. It's not designed this way, and that's the problem. So there will be never like enough patient voice in our development, approval, commercialization, patient access and use. And when you started with the question about, you know, like why no one shared, start with the basics, you know, alignment between stakeholders to who owns the data, right? There is still no clarity and alignment between multiple stakeholders. Who owns the data? And so until like when you will specify who actually owns the data, and it's the patient from my perspective, so who owns the data? There will be always questions about who owns what and who will share or who will not share.
Great points. Let's pivot a little bit. We got a question in the chat for David. What is the consideration for designing studies to validate the digital tools in absence of anchored endpoints? David, you want to take a stab at that?
Yes, I mean, that's a really good point, and it's one of our key challenges, because what we do is we develop some novel measure, and then to clinically validate it, we want to show it agrees with a measure that already exists. But if the measure that already exists is performing poorly, and that's the reason we've developed a new one, then what's the good in showing that it correlates well with it? We've talked with this kind of question with regulators before, and you know the key thing is they want to see at least it's going in the same direction, but you wouldn't necessarily expect a really strong correlation with a very noisy measure. So we want to make certain it's going in the right direction, but we don't have a very high bar for the threshold for the clinical validation in terms of correlation like that. Another part of those, you can also show differences between known groups is another way to show the clinical validity of it. So yeah, different approaches.
Thanks.
There is a distinction between regulatory approval for digital health technologies, which is a process that is lengthy and that requires a series of studies to be conducted, including the clinical studies. And another one is the validation per se. And so for the validation, there is a process that is verification, analytical, clinical validation, and usability studies. When you're going to implement a digital health technology, meaning a digital wearable in a clinical investigation, that will be probably as an initial exploratory endpoint, and the regulatory agencies will be asking for data that supports the performing characteristics of that specific device that is connected to having the data for the specific items that I just said: verification, analytical, clinical validation, and usability, not necessarily to be approved. And the performing characteristics will define the reliability of these devices, and they don't have to be connected with a predicate device. That is not a requirement. Thank you.
I wonder if I can get you both to address kind of the time for validation efforts, you know, the duration. I mean, I think part of the challenge is to be able to do this at the time of submission in order to feel that you're using something with high fidelity and that you can trust in it. But at the same time, this is not something that you can flick a switch on.
So there is a disconnect between the understanding of the time it takes to conduct verification, verification phase happens during the build-up of that digital health device to define the initial performing characteristics, and that is connected to the manufacturer's responsibility. And then the specific analytical, clinical, and usability studies that need to happen. And that is connected to the fit for purpose, a specific sponsor that is going to utilize that device. However, the sponsors, not all of them, there is a gradient of understanding, and not all of them really know or understand deeply that it really takes time. A clinical validation is a clinical study, and a clinical study requires a protocol, IRB approval, selection of sites, as you would do in any other clinical investigation. And you are just testing the device in the clinical setting. Just to give you an example, analytical validation requires control conditions similar to being in the laboratory. And it also requires time because you need to enroll people. And all of this has to be predicated by a statistical design or framework that will provide the meaningful results that you will obtain and that will add credibility to the performance characteristics of this. So time, it depends. There is not a universal deadline to do this, but it's not weeks before you're going to start a clinical investigation. And this can take 1 year, for instance. It depends on the digital health technology that needs to be validated.
Elly had a hand up.
I might add.
David, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yes,
no, I mean, I
one
would just
thing that I found.
Yeah, so sorry. I would just agree with what Isaac said. What you don't want to do is also just start your phase 3 clinical trial, and that's not the best time to start using the technology. So really start thinking at phase 1 about what you're planning to have as your endpoint in phase 3. And start using the technology back then. And it also depends on how novel what you want to do is. So if you're using something which has already had a lot of evidence behind it in academic literature or has already been used in clinical trials, then you don't need as long. But when I was showing you we've been doing in autism is entirely novel for use in clinical trials. And so far we've spent 5 years in the exploratory phase of it. We're just getting to validation now. So you can see that there can be a very long time horizon if you want to do something novel. Sorry, Erwin, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No worries. One thing that I was going to add, and I appreciate David's point a lot, is also it's not necessarily just the validation time. It's the shifting the mindset of standards of care time. And when there's an existing thing that's been done by clinicians for a long time, oftentimes the new technology is an added time point or an added data point, when that just adds burden to the patient. And so how do we more rapidly have clinicians be okay dropping potentially the existing standards of care? And there's a broad range, a Gaussian in the clinicians. There are early adopters that are great and will do that rapidly, and some that don't do it as quite as fast. And so how do we reduce the burden on patients by accepting that some of the standard of care data points can be dropped for new technologies that are less invasive or more patient friendly, but less established in years and years of experience. And so that's a challenge, I think, because ultimately these new tools will be extremely useful in making trials more lightweight for patients, but they have to be accepted also by the clinicians.
That goes connected with the usability studies that needs to happen. That's part of the validation. If you are designing a device that is not going to be used, that brings compliance and retention issues. So the patient centricity approaches is one of the value propositions of modern trial designs, and we need to keep that in mind. Any validation has to be fit for purpose, and it has to include the usability piece. If the patients are not considered, then we're not doing a good job. So I agree with you.
And I just wanted very quickly to add, if I may, that Endpoints, outcomes, thank you. Endpoints, outcomes, and comparator used in the clinical development are areas of most disagreement between regulatory agencies, payers, and HTAs in their decisions. In US, it is 47% disagreement. In Europe, it's 42% disagreement. So you might need to incorporate all these insights early when you are making this decision and design. And another point, very quickly, I promise, is that when you design something, there are always questions about three things, right? So a question about unknowns in the disease. You need to consider unknowns in the disease, unknowns in the drug, and unknowns in the process, right? So like what Isaac said, and David and Erwin, they touched unknowns in the process, right? So like how you can make the process more predictable, but be ready that your drug and your disease will always surprise you. Like there will be always new outcomes, or like there will be new effect. It's not possible to predict 100%. And so like thinking with this flexibility in mind about, like what does it mean for your condition? What does it mean for your drug that you are developing, and how to make the process more predictable? That should be in our hands. That would be basically my suggestion to move forward. Thank you.
Great comments. Elly, you had your hand up for a while.
Sorry, that was me forgetting to take it down.
Well, since we have you here, and I wanted to ask, as a sponsor, what prevents you from considering decentralized trial, or is that something on the horizon for your organization?
That's a question for me?
Yeah.
No, I think it's for us in oncology and pediatric oncology, certainly something that we are interested in, and we're continuing to evaluate, especially as we look as we're looking at rare subsets of patients that may be geographically very widely dispersed, and making those trials acceptable to patients. For oncology, I think it's really a matter of what assessments can be done, not in a centralized fashion, since most of our key assessments do depend on hospital settings in terms of imaging and other types of testing. But it's certainly for assessments that can be done more locally and more accessibly, that is certainly something that we are looking at and expect to implement increasingly as we move forward.
I mean, maybe just a follow-up, because in Isaac's presentation of the metaverse, it talked about that it was a significant FTE effort to pull some of this off. I'm curious, or maybe Isaac can weigh in too. Is this something that becomes more problematic just in terms of manpower resources to pull off?
So we understand that there is a gradient of knowledge implementation and even conducting this in multiple therapeutic areas. So where I am in ICON, we are already working in not only the design of a TCT enabled by one digital technology, but we are creating ways to add to DCTs the 2 and the 3 components that can represent the duplex and the triplex units to create that innovation in decentralized clinical trials. DCTs are not conducted only in the homes of the participants. DCTs are conducted in the ecosystems where participants live and leverage the standard and the local healthcare infrastructure. The more that we can enable that participation surrounding the participants with this supporting technology, the chances are that we will increase enrollment, recruitment, enrollment, and retention. And that is the idea behind all of this. Is this happening? Yes, it's happening. Is it happening in all organizations? No, not necessarily. Some organizations are embracing this, others are still yet to come. But this is the overall trend, and this is where the innovation lies. We know how to select the sites. We know the importance of the patients. We know that we need to deploy patient centricity efforts. The innovation really is in how we customize the technology ecosystems to create that universe of innovative opportunities to deploy the best and most efficient decentralized clinical trials going forward. And we are all learning in this space.
Isaac, speaking of learning, when you talk about pulling these off in a global manner, is this ready to go from that standpoint? Or when you talk about site selection, are there still geographic areas where you need to do a little bit more homework?
There is always homework to be done
Yeah.
in decentralized clinical trials and in any kind of modern trial design, for instance. So the fact is that there is not regulatory guidance as of today directly directed to decentralized clinical trials, for example, by the FDA, by the EMA, and by other regulatory agencies, except for the Sweden and Denmark that has issued one a position paper and the other one a local DCT guidance. The rest of the world really doesn't have those guidance documents. And so what happens is that there is a regulatory framework that has been created that is indirectly supporting modern trial designs, including decentralized clinical trials. For example, e-signatures, e-consent, computerized systems, which are guidance documents that we are all familiar with. Digital health technologies by the FDA issued last December of 2021 that supports all of the items that I just mentioned about verification, validation, and so on. So in lack of these universal or harmonized guidance documents around the regulatory jurisdictions and the different regulatory agencies, there is a major need for regulatory intelligence and country intelligence to understand what can be deployed and when and how. And so country readiness, regulatory intelligence add feasibility to the conduct of these clinical investigations. And that is continue to be a major point, even after the issuance of DCT regulatory guidance documents.
I see Solange has her hand up, so let's hear from the one and only.
Thank you. Well, I'd like first to thank, all what has been said so far. And I wanted to build on what Isaac mentioned, since there will be soon more guidance with regard to decentralized trials. You probably know that by Christmas, in Europe, there will be a recommendation paper issued by the European regulators. And this as a result, of the work they have been doing since a few months, knowing that recently the EMA organized a specific workshop on decentralized trials. And in addition, as you probably know as well, at ICH, the colleagues that are involved in the revision of the ICH GCP guidelines. E6 R3, yeah, exactly, revision 3. They are planning to include, some recommendation in an annex to the guideline. So this is
technology.
This is work ongoing.
Health technologies, yes.
Yeah. Exactly.
And the FDA is said publicly that by December of this year also, there will be the issuance of the DCT guidance. So we have the two major regulatory agencies in the world issuing this information or DCT guidance documents. And what we want to see is a bit of harmonization between the two so that we can still operate in a more consistent fashion. In Europe particularly, we dealt with the EMA in October 4th in the meeting that you just said, Solange, and we discussed one of the key aspects, which is JDPR and how to work within JDPR knowledge and directives to implement DCT solutions for pediatric rare diseases and other diseases across Europe. That is a reality.
Exactly, and also the work which is being done in Europe through a public-private partnership, IMI Trials at Home, is also of interest. Despite the fact that the trial, we are planning and which should be starting somewhere in early 2023, is focusing on adults. But of course, more to come with regard to pediatrics, since there is already experience, in the domain. Thank you.
Thanks, Solange. We have only a couple minutes left, but let's hear from Skip.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, there are real challenges in trying to implement these types of approaches in pediatrics. And I think, personally, I think it's more of a promissory note at this point as opposed to a reality. I appreciate everybody's enthusiasm, but simple things like, if you're timing some of your assessments to when a drug is being administered and you have an IV drug that's being administered, you can't really do that in the home, and not many pediatricians' offices, and there aren't many services that are offered that would get that drug delivery out to a pediatric patient, depending on the age of that patient. Let's say drawing blood. I would be reluctant to send a 1-year-old or a 2-year-old to just a local laboratory to draw blood, because I doubt that they'd have the necessary experience necessarily. And so we really need to think about what it looks like in terms of that experience to be able to say, can we truly get all of these services in a distributed way? There are limits, and we're still in a position where many patients really need to go to the center in order to be able to have the sufficient clinical and medical skill to deliver many of these interventions. So that often places significant limits on our ability to do this kind of study in a decentralized way.
But the future is bright, Skip, and I am a supporter of pediatric rare disease, including modern designs. As I show in my presentation, there is a trend up for pediatric DCTs, including rare diseases. And there are all these multiple considerations that we need to take into account. There is a heterogeneous population from newborn to age 18, if you will, or sometimes 21, depending upon the agency and the classification of this sector of the population. Considering all the heterogeneity, emotional, psychological, developmental differences that exist among this heterogeneous population, and the participation of the family and the caregivers, the planning can happen, and these trials are happening, and they will continue to happen. So it's a matter of working together and doing it in an efficient manner. There is a lot of front work that needs to happen to plan this in a best possible way, so that when you go through the trial, after following the participant journey and the data journey, there are no hiccups to deal with or minimize or mitigate them.
We're at the witching hour, so I want to thank both the speakers and the panelists for a very engaging discussion. I think there's lots to be looking forward to and a lot of work to do. So I think I'd encourage all of you to keep talking. This communication is key. I think one of the things that I see this whole session is we really need to stay together as a community. It really takes a village, to use a cliche, but thank you all for your participation, and I'll turn it back over to our colleagues at Certara.